Okay, so we're speaking about, again, the struggle of the Beinoni, which is what this chapter 12, is all about, and how the animal soul still speaks to him and lives within him, but he's able to control him entirely in the three realms of our existence, in thought, speech, and action. One of the great tools that the Beinoni has in controlling the animal soul is those moments in which the Beinoni is so one with God or one with his soul that it leaves an impression. Moments that are usually found in prayer, in Torah study, or even in doing a mitzvah. And we spoke last week about how really the impact of a mitzvah, the impact of prayer or Torah study is so great that it leaves an impression. It leaves such an impression that even if you recall, even the Hamans can, where it says that Haman, came out of the feast of Esther, good-hearted. Even those Hamans can have a transformation of heart, can become good-hearted for just a few moments. That's the power of doing a mitzvah, of prayer, of Torah study. It leaves such an impression that it can really change a person, even temporarily, even if it's only temporarily. That's the idea. And the Beinoni uses those moments indeed to give himself a boost, so that that impression is not just temporary, but becomes almost permanent. So that's the idea. Okay, let's continue here. Top of page 303, as you just said, Margot.
Yes.
Does anyone want to read? It's you, Margot.
I'll read.
Go for it, yeah.
So great is the power of the Benoni that even the sinful thoughts, which rise of their own accord from the left ventricle of the heart to the mind, see chapter 9, never develop into conscious, structured thoughts. These thoughts arise spontaneously within the Benoni because the divided heart with which he was born has not been rectified. His heart is like that of every man. He desires what everyone desires and lusts after, what everyone lusts after, each according to his taste and station. Yet, though he cannot prevent these thoughts from rising to his mind.
Right. No sooner, just continue with that paragraph here.
No sooner does it reach there than he thrusts it out with both hands and averts his mind from it in the instant he becomes aware that it is an evil thought, refusing to accept it willingly, not even allowing himself to willingly think it, and certainly not to entertain any idea of putting it into effect, God forbid, or even to speak of it. For one who willfully indulges in such thoughts is deemed a Rasha at such time, whereas the Benoni is never a Rasha, even for a single moment.
Right, so unlike the completely righteous, the Beinoni still has a heart with desires. By the way, this is why in the third paragraph of the Shema, it's interesting to note, but God warns us, Lo taturu acharei levavchem v'acharei enechem. You may remember that verse in which God says, don't be tempted after your hearts and then after your eyes. Why that order? Because the heart is in many ways the source of all evil. The heart desires. The heart that doesn't have a heart that is let loose and therefore doesn't have the clarity of the intellect can very easily fall into all sorts of traps. That's why the world of the emotions is so boisterous, and we have to be careful about it and dissect it well for those emotions to be channeled in the right way. But if not, the heart can cause great confusion, turmoil in the being of the person. And therefore, when God warns us in the Shema to not be tempted, not to deviate ourselves, he starts with the heart. Lo taturu acharei levavchem. Just like the Tanya says, that's the source, the heart. And then the eyes, and then the mind, and then the action, God forbid. But the heart is really the source, the foundation. And the Beinoni has the power, speaking of the source now, the heart, Beinoni has the power to immediately reject any deviation that the heart wants to pursue, any temptation. It immediately pushes it off. And I like this expression here. He thrusts it out with both hands, not with one hand. One hand would imply, let me think about it. Maybe yes, maybe I'll let him enter my mind, my consciousness or not. Here it's both hands. Go away. There's no doubt about how the Benoni year completely eliminates these thoughts. And that really, herein lies the power of the Benoni. The non-Benoni allows the mind and to maybe think about the desires of the heart, and then eventually maybe, God forbid, pursue the desires of the heart that are the desires that are not good. We're speaking about, obviously. Here, the Benoni has the power to immediately reject them as soon as they enter his consciousness. And in many ways, that's this book. Let's remind ourselves, it's called Sefer Benonim, a book of Benonim, because in many ways, this should be the goal of everyone. I know we sometimes can't do that 100% of the time, that when the heart desires a good ice cream, and it's purely for the pleasure of the good ice cream, not to use the energy of the ice cream, so we've spoken about, to worship God and so on, or desires that are worse, that are even sinful desires, then sometimes we think about them and so on. Here, I think the practical advice would be, well, let's at least pick an hour of the day, 30 minutes of the day, which we can try to be Benonis. We say, you know what, today from 10 to 10:30, I'm going to be a Benoni. Any desire that comes, that permeates, I'm going to also push off. Well, what's the expression here? That we're going to thrust it with both hands. And then slowly but surely increase those moments. I think that would be the most practical advice, to take these words and make them a reality.
Rabbi?
Yes, William, please.
I would like to make a comment.
Please.
First of all, we just got back to Toronto on Friday.
Oh, we miss you already.
We had some snow and hail yesterday.
Oh, no. Wow. Late in
Lasted for a few minutes, but it all melted. Anyways.
Okay.
Yeah. An interesting thing I read recently.
Yes.
The difference between a Rasha and a Tzaddik.
Okay.
And the answer is Sheinav.
Sheinav.
His teeth.
Oh.
And what does that mean? From out of your teeth comes harmful words. And teeth is also a metaphor for weapons.
Mm.
But if you do it with gematria, it comes out like this. The Rasha adds up to 570, Sheinav 366, and if you deduct the 366 from the 570, you get 204, which is a tzaddik.
Very good.
It adds up. And
beautiful.
When you talk about the four sons, the four sons are actually yourself. You start off not being able to ask questions. You develop by by being tam and so on until you're a chacham. But the four sons, one is a rasha, but none of them are a tzaddik. We never ascend to that level.
Right.
So that's my comment for today.
No, I love that. Thank you. And it's very, very apropos, because Passover is coming up tomorrow night, and we speak of the four sons. And I love the comment, because it's always an enigma going to that passage in the Haggadah, where we are responding to the question of the Rasha, one of the four sons, by in almost a violent manner. It's almost like what we're advocating violence, because the question of the Rasha, each of these four sons have a question. The question of the Rasha is a question that excludes himself, in which he asks, Ma avodah zot lachem? What are you guys doing here? And because he's not involving himself, it's not what we are doing, it's what you are doing. So he immediately, through that question, we can identify him as a Rasha. Person excludes himself as a Rasha. But the response to the Rasha, as you pointed out, William, is that we have to blunt out his teeth. What does that mean? Really? We have to give him like a Muhammad Ali punch? What does this mean? But what you said is very, now makes it very Understandable.
Let me give you something else while I'm at it.
Okay, please. Go for it.
You can't see it very well.
Oh, yeah. I
Did
see
you read
the
it?
four different. No, you can't read it. I see the four diagrams.
Okay. This is the 4 questions of the Seder. First question, can we eat? Second question, do we eat now? Third question, when do we eat? And the fourth question, will we ever eat?
So if we're going in that direction, I do want to go back to the Benoni and the Russia, the comment that you made. But, you know, one of the great lessons of Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, just as a side note here, was given through a parable regarding the night of the Passover, of the Passover Seder. He speaks about how two poor people who were raising funds heard that there's a Passover Seder by Jews, so they decided to go to the synagogue that night and hopefully be invited so that they'll finally have a meal. So they go to the synagogue and they're invited by 2 different hosts. So they said, okay, you go to this home, I'll go to this home. Let's meet after the meal in the local park. Okay. The first beggar goes to one host. And at first, as we all know, they give him a little wine. Then they give him a little piece of celery to salt. And then they tell the story for 3 hours. And then finally, they give him a piece of matzah. He says, what, that's the meal? He's so upset. He can't take it anymore. He leaves the host, slams the door after him, and goes and waits for his friend in the park. The other guy, the beggar, too, the same story, right? A little wine, a little celery, some stories, a little matzah, but he has the patience. Then he waits a little bit more. Finally, he's given a full meal. His friend, the beggar, is waiting for him in the park for an hour, for 2 hours. After 3 hours, he shows up. He says, where were you? He says, you don't understand, these Jews, they gave me this. And then finally I get to the meal and it's a cracker. He says, his friend tells him, if you had waited just a little bit more, you would have had a whole meal. And Rabbi Nachman of Breslev would often say, you see, that's life. Sometimes we get all frustrated and fall into anxieties. Just wait a little bit more, patience. Hashem will give you a whole meal. But that's that. So I love that. But going back to the Russia, so I think that's exactly the way to reach, and I'm glad you brought it up because it's very much connected, not just to Passover, but to what the Tanya is saying here, but to reach that level of the Benoni, because again, this is attainable to each and every one of us. That's why this book is called the Book of Benoni, because everyone can attain that level. How do you attain a level in which your heart desires something and you push off that bad thought immediately with both hands? I think that's exactly how, by saying, you know what stands between us and our ability to become Beinonis is, like you said, shinav, our teeth, our speech, and teeth referring to speech, or maybe our sharpness, our aggressiveness, or even violence. And what this really means is that if a person wishes to become a Benoni, don't rush into impulsivities, into speaking the way you just want to speak. Don't rush into impulsivities also in the world of thoughts. Not, as the Kotzker Rebbe famously said, I think we've mentioned this months ago, but not everything that is thought needs to be said. Not everything that is said should be written. Not everything that is written should be read. Not everything that is read should be published. Not everything that should be published should be distributed. Think about it. Wait a little bit. Take out the shinav. And if you see that it shouldn't go to the next level, push it away thrust it with both hands. Get rid of it.
What you said about the 2 beggars.
Yes.
It is said that if you're poor, your greatest virtue is patience. And if you're wealthy, your greatest virtue is humility.
Very good. I think the wealthy can use some patience too. Yeah. Okay, very good. I think we can all use patience. Yes. I want to welcome our youngest student here, and her name is Esther Leah.
Hey, hi, Rabbi.
Hi. Good morning. Hello. So good to have you studying Tanya with us.
Yeah. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Chag Sameach. Okay, let's continue. Let's continue. Middle of page 303, up to now.
Okay, up to now, the discussion has dwelled on sinful desires that relate to man's duties toward God. For example, the desire for a non-kosher food, a forbidden sexual relationship, and so on. The same applies to negative desires and behaviors in all that pertains to man's relationship with his fellows. So too, in matters affecting.
I just want to stop there because I think it's an important thing. We live in an age in which we see the numbers of mental health deteriorating more and more, and anxieties filling our lives and so on. Some of it, of course, is clinical, and I have no authority to speak about that. I'm no expert. If it's clinical, people should definitely go and see experts. But some of it is because we ruminate on these feelings all the time. And we allow them to permeate our minds as fear. And at first they start small, but then because we chew on them and chew on them and chew on them, they just swell. And this is exactly what this is saying here. It's an important comment by Rabbi Steinsaltz that, yes, the Tanya is speaking about sinful desires, but it's also speaking about negative desires and behaviors altogether, not just the sinful ones. And if our heart will feel them, there's no doubt about it. Our heart will feel anxieties, will feel fear, will feel insecurity, will feel doubts, will feel all these negative desires. But let's push them out with two hands. We have the power to do so. Let's help someone. Let's speak to someone who can help us push them out. But sometimes just ruminating on negativities is what really increases the negativities in our psyche. And therefore, the Tanya's advice here is so apropos, even though this was written 300 years ago, but it's so apropos to our day and age. Push them out with two hands. So it's an important comment. That's why I wanted to stop and reflect on that for a second. But continue, Margot.
So too, in matters affecting a person's relations with his fellow, as soon as there arises from his heart to his mind some animosity or hatred, God forbid, or jealousy or anger, or a grudge or such like, he gives them no entrance into his mind and will.
Right. One more paragraph here.
Benoni is not a person who never gets angry, but he has sufficient control over himself not to indulge his anger and allow it to take root in his mind and develop into a full-fledged emotion.
Right. So Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Tversky of blessed memory famously analyzed the world of emotions by saying that every emotion has three steps. Let's take anger, which is the example you're given. The anger is one emotion. If you allow it to swell into the next step, it becomes rage. And if you allow it to swell into the next step, it becomes grudge. People keep grudges because they're angry. And keep grudges sometimes for years and years. Now, the Tanya here is suggesting actually a new first step. Yes, there is anger, or maybe a second step. There is anger, but there is a second type of anger. Anger 1, anger 2, rage, grudge. Anger 1 is feeling angry, but before it overtakes you, you immediately reject it. Sometimes anger can overtake you before it becomes rage. It overtakes you, and for a few moments you like you can't function, or no one can speak to you because you're so angry. So instead of allowing it to swell to that type of anger, there's anger 1, which the Benoni is able to immediately stop before it gets to anger 2. And certainly the Benoni doesn't allow anger 2 to become rage. I mean, it doesn't reach anger 2. But again, if it does reach anger 2, it certainly doesn't become rage, doesn't become a grudge. And that's true for every emotion. Also for positive emotions, by the way. They all have those 3 or 4 steps, if you wish. Take joy, which is a positive emotion. Joy can be a great emotion. And step 2 of joy is, I would say, jubilance. That overtakes you, that your whole day is changed. But then it could get into a place of ecstasy. where you become numb. Is that good or bad? Don't know. Depends on the circumstance. But again, every emotion has those 3 steps. Why am I saying this? Because the Tanya is very cognizant of those 3 steps and is able to crush negative emotions immediately before they swell into step 2, 3, 4. And that's, again, attainable for everyone. Otherwise, we wouldn't be reading this. This is the book of Benoni that's attainable for everyone. So whether it's anger, everyone has their own weaknesses. And we have to ask ourselves, what is that trait that I'm relying sometimes to get into step 2 and 3 when I should be crushing it? If it's a negative one, obviously, one should be crushing it immediately, right? Let's continue here. Maybe we'll finish it off.
Okay. On the contrary, his mind exercises its authority and power over the spirit in his heart to do the very opposite and to conduct himself towards his fellow with the quality of kindness and a display of extra affection, to tolerate him to the extreme limits without becoming provoked into anger, God forbid, or to revenge in kind, God forbid.
Right. So
The Torah forbids this outright in Leviticus 19:18. But
right.
rather to repay the offenders with favors as taught in the Zohar, that one should learn from the example of Joseph towards his brothers.
Right. Joseph, who could have held a grudge for years and could have actually exercised his revenge towards his brothers. He sold him to slavery, threw him in a pit first, and then sold him to slavery. Instead, he was good to them. And he says that it was all designed by God. And that's the way to transform anger, not just to crush it, but to transform anger into a positive channel, like a Benoni should do. In summation, let's go. Let's finish this chapter.
Okay. In summation, the Benoni is one whose godly soul successfully controls his animal soul. Although he experiences all forms of temptation, such as anger, hatred, and lust, in exactly the same way that the Rasha experiences them, he will not succumb to them, even in thought. In his willful thoughts, and certainly in his speech and deeds, he expresses only the goodness and holiness of his godly soul.
Right. And that's a lifetime job. But it's something that is, again, very much attainable. Not just to crush the negative thoughts immediately as they appear, but also to try and transform them into something positive. And then we rid ourselves of any negativities. And really, we become not just positive beings, but in many ways, holy beings, allowing the impressions of all the good deeds that we do to really permeate us fully. That's the goal of the Benoni.